Everyone, and just a massive thank you to James and Rahima from Stop Uyghur Genocide for organizing this webinar. I think we're going to have a good conversation today with two luminaries in the field that I'm very excited about. Today we're primarily going to talk about China's 15th five-year plan, what it means for the continued repression of the Uyghur people, and how Beijing is using that repression to cement its dominance over critical global industries. But we're going to focus very much on the Uyghur people, not just industries and commerce. We recognize that the Chinese state is committing genocide against the Uyghur people, and a key aspect of genocide is eliminating identity. China does this to Uyghur, Tibetan, and others with extraordinary ruthlessness and in plain sight. As we know, because mountains of evidence shows this, and so does the courageous testimony of Uyghur people themselves, Beijing is very skilled at making repression look like celebration, and making erasure look like development, and making forced labor look like economic opportunity. And the world, our governments, our companies, our institutions, has largely let it happen. In March of this year, Beijing released its 15th five-year plan, which is a blueprint that codifies its industrial ambitions that is then operationalized by provinces across China. And what that means is that, according to lots of reporting, including by the Financial Times, FT, last couple of days, who published a sweeping investigation into Beijing's ambitions in Western China. The scale is massive. There's a $167 billion hydroelectric dam. Hundreds of millions of tourists are flooding into a region that the UN says that may have been the site of crimes against humanity. International hotel chains, names all of us would recognize, are opening properties on the sites of demolished mosques. A new law taking effect next month, this will also force ethnic minorities to stop speaking their own languages. You and I can go onto booking.com right now and book hotels in Xinjiang. Some of this work that Beijing is doing is working. China is exploiting the ancestral home of the Uyghur people, and it has successfully woven their exploitation into global supply chains. The cotton in our clothes, the titanium in our cars, the lithium in our phones, all likely contain materials from the Uyghur region. There are millions of Uyghurs whose daily lives are monitored by one of the most sophisticated surveillance states ever built. And this will only intensify, as Nyrola will talk about in a little bit. There are children coming out of preschool no longer able to speak their own mother tongue. These are Uyghur children. There are families who have not been able to speak to their relatives in over a decade, many whose family members have been disappeared with no trace. And there are companies, some headquartered in our cities that we live in, listed on our stock exchanges, so we invest in them, who are making money from this wholesale exploitation. Many of you know about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that the US has, that has made a line in the sand, and it has had an impact. However, China has responded with its own new rules, making it even harder for multinationals to conduct due diligence. Yet while our policies and our businesses might fail us, I do see hope in the daily acts of resistance by the Uyghur diaspora community members. This past weekend, I live in Washington, D.C., I got to spend some time with the Uyghur American Association, and they had organized a group of high school and college kids, Uyghur kids from all over the U.S., to come to Washington, D.C. for 2 days of intensive learning. Learning about how governments enact policy, learning about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and international laws and conventions. They met with staff of members of Congress, and they were taught by renowned Uyghur activists here in the US, like Johar Ilham, Altadar Talbir, and Misran Dolan. These children were born outside of their native homeland, and a generation removed are keeping their identity alive. They speak the Uyghur language, they dance to Uyghur music, they practice their religion, and they savor Uyghur food. Each of these acts may seem routine to many of us, but for Uyghur people, they're also a powerful act of resistance to a Chinese state that is literally moving mountains to erase their identity. I see no greater urgency than to do all that we can to support these children so that perhaps one day they may be able to return to their homeland and reunite with their uncles, their aunts, and their grandparents. And this is why I'm particularly honored to have this conversation with two of our speakers today. I will briefly introduce them and then turn it over to Nyrola to start the presentation. So Nyrola is an Emmy-nominated journalist and independent researcher specializing in supply chain tracing, forced labor, and transnational repression, with a focus on Uyghur issues linked to the People's Republic of China. She currently serves as a business and human rights research and review advisor to Global Rights Compliance, where I work as well. And Rahima Mahmut, who I'm particularly very honored to be in the same space with always. She's a human rights activist, writer, singer, and translator. As co-founder and executive director of Stop Uyghur Genocide and an advisor to the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, she has played a leading role in mobilizing UK and international civil society against the ongoing Uyghur genocide. Rahima has worked closely with survivors on major media investigations and interpreted witness testimonies during the Uyghur Tribunal. Through her advocacy, writing, and cultural work, she amplifies Uyghur voices while preserving Uyghur language, heritage, and music while in exile. Rahima, it's always an honor to be in rooms with you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nyrola, who has a brief presentation for us.
Thank you, Samir. Yes, thanks, James. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And today I want to walk you through some analysis we done at GRC on China's newly released 15 5-year plan and what specifically it means to the Uyghur region. Next slide, thanks. So every 5 years, China publish one of these plans. They're not just wishes list. They drive how officials are evaluated and how money will get allocated across the country. The latest one, which is covered from 2026 to 30, it's very clearly focused on one thing, making China self-reliant on the technology. Beijing wants to make sure no one can squeeze them on the chips, on critical minerals, on advanced manufacturing. So to pull this off, China needs raw material at a massive scale, and Xinjiang is right at the center of that. The region has most of the China's critical minerals and has incredibly cheap coal power and make the mineral process economical. The coercive labor system in Xinjiang therefore won't be winding down, and it actually has been scaled up. Next slide, please. I want to give you a quick overview of the main findings before we dive in. First, China's ambition in the semiconductors, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing all reset on the raw material. And Uyghur region is being deliberately positioned as the supplier. And second, the energy cost difference is dramatic. Renewable on-grid price in Xinjiang range from 2.1 to 3.6 cents, making all-in industry power costs well below the US average and EU level. And this actually is not a small gap. And that is the structural advantage built on the cheap coal and cheap labor. Third, the US defense system and AI infrastructure depends heavily on the China lithium batteries and upstream material run through the Uyghur region. And fourth, the plan specifically targeted the southern Xinjiang for the industry expansion. That is exactly where the Uyghur population is most concentrated and where the forced labor has been most extensively documented. Next slide, please. The labor control system itself has been upgraded. The traditional way of carrying out forced labor transfer rely on local cadre and police going door to door, using their own jurisdiction record to register, to press, and to transfer worker manually. But now an AI-driven big data platform has been taken over. It continuously tracks every individual classified as having labor capacity. And this will automatically flag everyone, those who are not enrolled in a transfer program, and trigger intervention on its own. So the human and forces are still there, but now they will execute what the algorithm designed. And plan explicitly call for a permanent mechanism. And this is not a temporary anti-poverty campaign. And I think it was in 2021 or 2022, Xi Jinping has been announced the poverty has been elevated, but now they are mainly focused on poverty, prevented poverty. So they are going to design this to the last, with the surveillance and intervention will build in to everyone who refuse to participate any of the state-imposed program. And the CCP also adopted a law on promoting ethnic unity and progress, which will pursue assimilation of the ethnic minorities to strengthen coercion of the Chinese culture. And we have been seeing this, at least we have been seeing this since 2017. And now this become officially, and it will design to the entire, subject to entire China for the rest of the other ethnic minority as well. And we can also think about like how they're going to continue eradication of the Uyghur and other ethnic identity and culture. Next slide, please. So let me zoom in what this plan actually means in practice. Based on our analyst, the center of this plan is tech self-reliance, and we read this as a direct response to the trade tensions and technology restriction coming from the West, whether it is from the US, UK, or EU, or Japan. What stands out to us is how Beijing has framed the gap is still needs to be closed. The plan identifies what it calls the key core technologies, and when you look at the priority investment, there were 5 sectors come through clearly: integrated circuits and high-end machine tools, foundational software, advanced materials, and biomanufacturing. These are the areas where China is still dependent on the foreign inputs. And from our reading, these are the dependencies Beijing is most determined to eliminate. To put this in the context, and this has come from the broader research, not from the 5-year plan itself. We did the research on this, and then we find out that China has reportedly made a breakthrough in roughly 60 to 70% of the 35 choke point technology it originally identified. But the remaining gaps are concentrated in the hardest and the most strategically sensitive sectors. So from our perspective, this 5-year plan should be rated as urgent push to close that final, the most difficult strengths. And there's one more development worth flagging. The plan elevated computing capacity to the level of national strategic infrastructure. So this putting into on the same tire as like electricity and transportation. We see this as a clear signal of how seriously Beijing is treating the AI race, and it ties directly back to why control over Uyghur region's resource and energy matters so much. Next slide, please. China's technology ambitions cannot be separate from the raw material that makes them possible. And from everything we have examined, Xinjiang sits at the center of that supply. And this is not our analytical conclusion. If you look back, what Chinese government has been doing this. For example, in 2023, the central government formally designed the Xinjiang as a national strategic base for energy and resource security. This is not an economic phrase. This is a national security language. It means the central authority have officially defined Xinjiang's role as a strategic supplier whose resources are considered essential to the security of the entire country. And by January 2026, 2 months before the two session, which is also where the 5-year plan officially being released, the Xinjiang government had a work report, and there they mentioned that they have been assigned an even broader set of the responsibility. It will have the covering mineral processing, energy supply, and computing infrastructure. The number behind this is quite striking. Uyghur region holds 83.5% of the China's proven beryllium reserves. This is a material with a very limited practical substitute in aerospace, semiconductors, or nuclear technology. And in 2024, Uyghur region total trade value reached $60 billion, growing nearly 22% year on year, driven by exactly the product ties to the like plan strategic priority. And then during the truth session, so in March, of the 109 major engineering projects announced under the 15th five-year plan, there's 2 are directly tied to Xinjiang's mineral wealth. This isn't an accidental like a position. It's a deliberate and top-level strategic planning. Next slide, please. And here's the part of the story that doesn't get enough attention. Uyghur Region's advantage, it's not just about what is in the ground, it's about how cheaply the raw material can be processed once they're out of it. And in our view, the cost advantage comes down 2 things working together. The first is cheap coal-fired power, and another one is state-imposed forced labor. As I mentioned earlier, the renewable on-grid price in the Uyghur region range from 2.1 to 3 cents. And this will put all industry power cost well below the US and EU level. It's literally making the US and EU has disadvantage in the market. And Xinjiang's electricity is not a market outcome. The region runs on the cheap coal-fired power, coal that mined, transported, and burned with a system that relies heavily on the coercive labor at the multiple stage. And second, the labor cost across the entire energy infrastructure, from the mining to the coal operating the plants to building the transmission lines, is artificially suppressed by the state-imposed labor transfer system. So when you see 2% per kilowatt hour, what you're really looking at price that has the forced labor baked into from the beginning. And this is matter for the global market, because for the material like a titanium, magnesium, and the lithium, power accounts for like 40 to 60% of the total processing cost. By the time this mineral reached the global market, their price already carried this hidden subsidy. Producers who don't rely on the state backing or coercive labor simply cannot compete on the price alone. It's not because they're not inefficient. It's not because they are incompetent. It's because they're competing against a system. There's no way they can win unless they also using the forced labor from the local. And here is the part that why making the regulation is so difficult. Once the electricity enters the national grid, it's effectively stripped out from its origin. So products manufacturing outside Xinjiang can still benefit from this hidden subsidy. And we know China has hold like their control majority of this minor processing. They're processing material from Brazilian, from Congo, from Australia, from other from other country. And another thing is the electricity does not consider as a raw material input. So this is, at least from my perspective as a researcher, I would see this is one of the biggest blind spots in the current supply chain regulation. Next slide, please. And I want to show you what this dynamic looks like when it's played out over the time. We see the exact pattern before, and the warning signs were ignored until it was too late. If you look at the polysilicon, between 2010 and 2020, China share the global production climbed from 26% to the 82%. And over the same decade, we use the US as example, went opposite direction from the 35% to the 5%. By the time the Western government, Western company fully recognized what was happening, more than 45% of the global supply chain was already dependent on the Xinjiang. And when this dependence reached this level, decoupling become extremely expensive, economically, politically, operationally. We have been hearing the solar industry right after the Biden administration sanctioned the Chinese company. We have been even hearing the solar industry wanted to exceptional from the sanction. Why? Because it's impossible for them to sourcing from other area. And our concern is that the critical mineral now on the same way, because except this time it will be the stakes are higher. Unlike solar panel, this material feed directly into the Western defense industry, and where they have the limit subsidies. So the consequences the dependencies on the China and on the Uyghur region's critical mineral is go well beyond the clean energy. And honestly, this is not some hypothetical risk anymore. It's already happening with the titanium. I just need a drink. Like now, China controls over 55% of the global capacity. And with Uyghur region as a key production base, backed by the cheap power and scale, the Chinese producer have the systematically pushed down the global price, which has promoted the EU, India, and the Saudi Arabia to launch the anti-dumping investigation. The EU 2025 duties of nearly 40% are essentially delayed response to the market structure that already locked in. By the time the policy to arrival, the dependencies is already built. And this slide is like, I will just say that the Uyghur state, the state imposed forced labor in the Uyghur region, we already documented in our 5-year report. And also we have been doing the research in about Xinjiang. They just scaled up. It didn't weaken, it didn't come down. Next slide, please. And this slide is also about state-imposed labor is growing, as you can see from the PowerPoint from the slide. And you can also see now they are relying on kind of the platform is called like big data plus iron fit. The iron fit is the cadre and police. Next slide, please. And this is what has happened since the plan was released. So on exactly the same day, 5-year plan was officially released in Beijing. There were 18 major central state-owned enterprise signed a cooperation agreement with Xinjiang and the XPCC, cover 92 separated projects. And the investment approximately like 18 billion pounds or around 22 billions US dollar. And the project fall into exactly 4 areas: energy, minerals, computer power, and equipment manufacture. Next slide, please. I wouldn't go in detail, everything is pretty straightforward from the slide. So if I wrap up that the Uyghur forced labor is continue and is accelerating, and this will directly raise to the global supply chains and also will bad for the other fair player in the global supply chains who wanted to do the good business, but somehow being forcing to facing this competition from China. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nyrola. A couple things. One is, China cannot dominate in critical minerals without the continued exploitation of the Uyghur people, and I really appreciate you highlighting that. And I know you spent hours and hours those few weeks in March listening to speeches, reading all the texts, so we appreciate that you did all that hard work for us and all that you continue to do to highlight these issues. I will now pass it on to Rahima.
Thank you, and thank you, Nyrola, for this very important presentation. As a Uyghur woman in exile, listening to these findings is deeply painful, not because they are new to us, but because they confirm with evidence and precision what Uyghur families have been living through for many years. When people hear the words forced labor, they often imagine factories and cheap products. But for Uyghurs, state-imposed forced labor is not simply an economic issue. It is about the destruction of human lives, family bonds, dignity, memory, and identity itself. The latest Financial Times investigation again confirms that these atrocity crimes are not ending. They are evolving, expanding, and becoming more sophisticated. The Chinese government presents these policies as poverty elevation or development, but what kind of development separates mothers from children? What kind of prosperity criminalizes language, faith, and culture? What kind of Modernization places millions of people under surveillance while forcing them into labor transfers under threat and fear. The Uyghur homeland is extraordinarily rich in resources: oil, gas, coal, cotton, lithium, rare earth minerals, the critical minerals necessary for semiconductors, AI systems, green energy, and high-tech manufacturing. The world often speaks about supply chains and the strategic competition, but for Uyghurs, this extraction comes with unbearable human cost. And entire people are being transformed into a controlled labor force on their own ancestral homeland. Uyghurs are forcibly transferred far away from their homes and communities, while Han Chinese settlement and state-led demographic change continue to reshape the region. Families are scattered. Traditional neighborhoods disappear. Community life is broken apart. The deepest suffering is often hidden inside homes. Children are placed into state-run boarding schools and institutions where they lose the warmth of family life, the embrace of their mothers, the sound of their own language, and the comfort of their spiritual and cultural traditions. These are not small losses. These are the foundations of human identity. A mother should never have to fear that her child will forget her language, her prayer, her songs, or even how to call her mother in their own language. Uyghur women carry extraordinary pain. Many are transferred into factories under coercive conditions. Many endure intimidation, separation, humiliation, and pressure into marriages designed to accelerate assimilation. And this is not accidental. It is part of a systematic attempt to dissolve Uyghur identity from within the family structure itself. The new ethnic unity law further legalizes these practices and deepens state control over every aspect of life. Uyghurs are increasingly left with nowhere to express grief, resistance, or even sorrow safely. And while the world discusses AI innovation and technological progress, we must also speak honestly about how technology is being weaponized against an entire people. In the Uyghur homeland, AI is not simply innovation. It has become a machinery of control, surveillance, and automated persecution. Every movement monitored, every refusal recorded, every human being reduced to data. Even the environmental destruction is ignored. Coal extraction, industrial expansion, mineral processing, and endless exploitation continues across the Uyghur homeland with devastating consequences for the land itself, a land deeply connected to Uyghur history, poetry, spirituality, and belonging. This is why Uyghurs say the issue is not only forced labor. It is a deliberate breaking of a society to isolate people, to weaken memory, to sever generations from one another, to erase language, culture, and spiritual life, and ultimately to erase the very meaning of being Uyghur. But despite all this, Uyghurs continue to speak, remember, sing, write, mourn, and resist. Because even under immense repression, the human soul still longs for dignity, truth, and freedom. Thank you.